Welcome back to Hot Mess History. I'm your hot mess historian, Janet. In this video, we're talking about Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife. Now, there isn't a whole lot to cover about her. It's going to be short, sweet, and to the point. They were married less than about 18 months or so. So let's dive into it. Jane Seymour was born into the Seymour family, who was a very prestigious family at the time, and they were actually descendants of King Edward II. Now, as a female member of this prestigious family, Jane, of course, as we learned in other videos, was given the honor to serve as a lady-in-waiting for Queen Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Now, while Jane was sort of present at court throughout the first two marriages, she really comes into play towards the middle to end of Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. If you remember from the previous video, Henry was noticeably absent from the birth of Princess Elizabeth. That's because he was visiting the Seymour country home at the time, and that's when he really begins to notice hot stuff Jane. Anne was a loudmouth, and that was unusual for a woman at the time. She never held back her feelings, which were usually anger, jealousy, or hatred about someone or something, to herself. And Jane was the exact opposite of Anne. She was very soft-spoken, timid, and subservient, which Henry was like, oh, this is uber refreshing. He was growing really tired of Anne's outbursts, temper tantrums, and I mean, I guess you could say it was a manifestation of her anxiety over her position. Can I give the king a son? But regardless of that, Henry had had enough. He's like, I'm done with Anne. I'm looking for something way more stable than where she is at. After the death of Catherine of Aragon and then a subsequent second miscarriage from Anne, Henry, as you recall, is really looking for a way to get out of this relationship with Anne. He wants desperately to go public with his relationship with Jane, who he has been seeing as his mistress while Anne was pregnant. And if, again, go back and watch the Anne Boleyn video because some stuff goes down hardcore. Anne is arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. She is put to death May 19th, 1536. Jane and Henry are betrothed the very next day, and they're married May 30th. Pretty quick. After the wedding takes place between Jane and Henry, Jane never has a formal coronation, so I guess you could say technically she was never Queen of England, but Henry proclaimed her publicly as queen in June of 1536. The reason behind why she didn't have a formal coronation is kind of up in dispute. There are two rules of thought on this. The first is that there was a plague going on, and for the safety of Jane, the king, and all the courtiers, they decided, nah, we're not going to do this. We're going to quarantine. I wonder what that's like. And we're not going to have a coronation, which is fine. She's queen anyway. Let's move on with our lives. The second rule of thought is that Henry abstained from crowning another queen until he could be certain he was going to have a male heir. He didn't want to go through all of the luxury and ceremony and all of that to marry someone, have her crowned queen, and then wind up without an heir, just like he's done two previous marriages. Jane is described as being a strict, formal, and quiet queen. She had done away with all of the lavish dressings of Anne Boleyn, all of the frivolous, everything that Anne brought in that was just over the top and very, I'm here in your face. Jane was not that way. She had it all removed. Just the way that Anne had come in and was trying to remove any trace of Catherine of Aragon, Jane kind of comes in and is like, I'm going to remove all traces of Anne Boleyn. During her reign as queen, Jane shows great compassion for Queen Catherine of Aragon and actually grew very, very close with Princess Mary, Henry's first daughter, and tries to encourage Henry to rebuild his relationship with his first daughter. And she and Mary grow very close. Jane became pregnant sometime around January of 1537. And Henry is noted as being like the picture-perfect, doting husband and soon-to-be father. He catered to Jane's every whim, want, and craving. Which, speaking of cravings, I wouldn't say I had really weird cravings when I was pregnant, but she'd crave quail, which I mean, given the time period, I guess is normal, but it doesn't sound normal to me. I mean, I'm just a good old Southern girl, so I don't know. But Henry had quail, these birds, shipped in from all over Europe so that he could cater to this desire and this craving she had, and really doted on her. What she wanted, she got. Jane went into labor in October of 1537 and was in active labor for 2 days and 3 nights. And finally, on October 12th, 1537, gives birth to the long coveted, long desired son. Henry has a male heir to the throne. He could not be happier. He is over the friggin' moon. He's planning celebrations, banquets, every bell, church bell that possibly could ring in London. He is setting them on fire, bing bonging all over the place. I mean, this guy is ready to, his brain's going to explode. He's just so happy. He finally has a male heir. That is what this has all been for. Unfortunately, these celebrations would not be joyous for very long. Jane soon developed what's called a puerperal fever, known as childbirth fever back then. I apologize for the pronunciation. Again, I'm a Southern girl and medical terms are very difficult for me to pronounce. I'm really sorry. This fever, childbirth fever, is a fever that lasts more than 24 hours after giving birth due to an infection. This infection entered her bloodstream and she was unable to recover, and she died just 12 days after giving birth. Jane was given a queen's funeral, which, by the way, she was the only wife of Henry that received this honor, this queen's funeral, only one. It said that Mary, Princess Mary, served as her chief mourner, which is a position that's designated to an immediate family member. And they're kind of in charge of making all of the arrangements, seeing to all of the guests, and kind of really running the show at the funeral. So that's really, really big. And that shows you how close Jane and Princess Mary had grown to one another. Now, Henry truly mourned the death of Jane. He wore mourning clothes or dressed in black for months afterward, which he did not do for any of his other wives. He referred to her as his first true wife. She is the only one of Henry's wives to be buried alongside him in the tomb where he's buried. So he left instructions in his will that he is to be laid and interned with Jane by his side. So that shows he truly did love her. Now, whether it was true romantic love or he just really loved her because she gave him the son that he wanted, who knows? But the point is, she absolutely made an impact on Henry and was treated uniquely from all of his other wives.